Hi, this is Lynn, coming to you from Otis, Massachusetts. Greg and I were going to shoot the Wednesday night Bible study up here, and he had to rush out to his father's to help him with a hospital trip. So since the camera got left here and all the books got left here, I get to do the Wednesday night Bible study. Originally, I had not been very excited over this one, the doctrine of the church. I'm like, oh, how boring. But as I read the materials, it really excited me and inspired me, and I'm glad that I get to do this. So first, let me open in a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for those that faithfully gather to learn more of your word and more about you. And Lord, this doctrine of the church, may you inspire us to be a part of it, to be an active part of the church that makes it better, to be a part of the church that reaches to the rest of the world. And Lord, may we do your will every day in everything we do. Amen. So let me read you some church examples. A small group meets in a secret, quietly huddling in a subdued living room. Their presence isn't legal in Saudi Arabia. If they're caught, some could be sent to prison, others could lose their lives. The room falls silent as they hear footsteps outside the door. And yet another one. Thousands of affluent suburbanites gather in a large state-of-the-art building in Atlanta. The lights, video, and production represent the best of the best. People come dressed in casual clothes, carrying their coffee into the worship center. The band cranks up and the room is flooded with moving lights and haze. The people begin to worship with their hands and voices raised. And here's another. Everyone wears white jumpsuits. How'd you like to go to church with that dress code? Guards are posted around the room. As men file in, smiles break across their faces. A band begins to play upbeat music which fills the hopeless space with joy. The men clap their hands in celebration. A man comes to the microphone and declared, "Brothers, we once were free on the outside. Now we may be in prison, but we are free on the inside." And here's another. An organ plays as a robed choir member sways back and forth to the music. Even though they are few, they make a joyful noise. The people are sitting in old pews, meeting behind stained glass windows that picture the life of Jesus. The pastor gets up to proclaim hope to his congregation. Outside, the drug dealers and gangs make inner city Detroit a fearful place to live. And the last one? Only one light bulb illuminates the cinder block building. People rode in the back of pickup trucks for several miles to get there, traversing the jungles of Guatemala. Most hadn't eaten all day, but after the service is over, they will share tortillas and soft drinks. Someone stands with a guitar and begins to lead out in song. What do these things all have in common? They may sound very different, but they are all the church. Because the church isn't a building. The church isn't an institution. The church is a gathering of true believers. The early church was a powerful movement that was both initiated and sustained by God. People were saved, lives were transformed, the gospel preached, and people were sent out to tell the nations about Jesus. But even the early church members needed reminders, because you know that human nature, we just end up drifting back over to where we were comfortable, where we came from, and it's a constant struggle with God's help to stay where we need to be. So even those early church members needed reminders about what church really was and how important it was. So let's look at Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 through 25. I'll give you a chance to get there. That's Hebrews 10, 19 through 25. And so, dear brothers and sisters, we can boldly enter heaven's most holy place because of the blood of Jesus. By his death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place. You know, the Holy of Holies was separated from the rest of the temple by a thick curtain that I think they say it was 1 inch thick. And when Jesus died, it tore from top to bottom, because we no longer needed the sacrifice of the priests to enter the holies of holies where the presence of God was. Jesus was that sacrifice, and now we can come straight into the presence of God. And since we have a great high priest who rules over God's house, let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him, for our guilty consciences have been sprinkled with Christ's blood to make us clean, and our bodies have been washed with pure water. Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promises. And here is an ideal, verses 24 and 25 is an ideal of the church. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Now, there are several elements in here that all are part of a healthy church. One, we enter into God's presence. Jesus has paid with his blood. He has made the sacrifice. We no longer need a high priest in our place. We can go into the presence of God. And we need to, in the church, enter into the presence of God. And then another thing is that we are to encourage one another. And let us think of ways to motivate one another. This is more than just going, hey, how you doing, Marcia? Boy, you do a lot in the church. We need to think of ways. That means you plan ahead of time. Premeditated good. Think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. If you know somebody that has a gifting, nudge them to use that for the Lord. If you know somebody who has a need and somebody else you think could fill that need, hook them up. And encourage people that the things they can do for God. And we should be motivating each other. In a church, you've heard iron sharpens iron. Well, spirit sharpens spirit. And we should, as Christians, as we come up against each other, our lives should motivate each other to want to do more for God. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do. That meeting together was very important. And it says, not only don't neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another. So that is whole part of the church too, is encouragement. There is something about meeting together that you don't get from sitting in your living room watching YouTube church. I mean, yes, you can get blessed by it, but there is something about being with other Christians, that gathering, that the feeling of the Holy Spirit. The Bible talks about how prayer, corporate prayer, where 2 or 3 of you are gathered together in my name. There is something about that gathering that is crucial, that is special. It's not just I don't feel like going to church today, and I'll just read extra Bible. No, there's a need for Christians to be with each other. And if you don't have that, you are not encouraging each other, you are not lifting up each other, and you are missing part. I mean, you can worship to a song on your own to the radio, But boy, there's a difference between that and when you're in the church all worshiping together. And the power of the Holy Spirit falls so heavily when we are united together. So that is something that you just can't replace with, and right now we're having to because of COVID-19. But I'm worried sometimes that when COVID-19 ends, and someday this will end, that some people are going to say, well, it's easier just to stay home. But no, you need that fellowship. You need to get together with other people. It's not the same. So we understand. This passage not only guides us into understanding what church is, but how we should live and work as members of the church. So, what is the church? First and foremost, it's a family. When you become a Christian, Jesus becomes, he's almost like he's your friend, he's like he's your brother, and he has shed his blood for you, God your Father. And the early church called each other brother and sister. In fact, this was such a habit in the early church that there were charges of incest against the early Christian church because people called each other brother and sister, and then they'd get married and you'd see them kissing and, hey, aren't they brother and sister? But that is how that they felt that they were one family. And it's not enough just to be part of the family on a grand scale, what we refer to as the universal church, which is all believers together are part of this universal church. But it is very necessary to meet in a smaller body, to meet as Christians together. And the early church, they met daily. I mean, we complain about once a week, or maybe once a week and then Wednesday night. They met daily. And you say, oh, yeah, well, we could never do that nowadays. I'll tell you, down in Pensacola, where the revival's going on, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they met every single night. And because people had so much joy and so much love in the presence of God, there was nothing better. I don't want to stay home and watch a TV show. I want to be in the presence of God. It's much more exciting. And every single day, there were lines and people in lawn chairs sitting out waiting to get into that church. So, the consequences of avoiding membership in a local church are vast and many. And one of the big things is that, remember I talked about how our spirit sharpens spirit and how we learn from each other and how we are blessed by each other and inspired by each other and encouraged by each other. Without that Christian fellowship, what kind of fellowship are you having? Is it the people at work? You know, the people you meet in the store? It's an influence on you. And spending your time with like-minded people, with like-minded beliefs, inspires you, lifts you up, encourages you, and brings you closer to God. And without that, you're going to end up slipping back into more of a worldly mindset. And we know that God's people were called to be a community. Let's look in the book of Acts. And so this is right at the point of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, verses 41 through 47. So we're coming in pretty much right after Peter had preached. So in Acts chapter 2, verse 41, those who believed what Peter said were baptized and added to the church that day, about 3,000 in all. All of the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. Wow, what an incredible church. Sharing everything. It was, if you had a need, this is how the church took care of you. If you had a need, everybody shared everything. Nobody went hungry. They shared their food. They had extra plot of land. They'd sell it. They'd donate it to the church. And they were just so in love with God and in love with each other, as Christians should be. And it grieves me that when Christians aren't. When you have been at a time of going, God's presence falls on the church. When you turn around and look at the people, they are beautiful. They are lovely to you. You just look at them and you love everybody there, because that same presence is in each of you, and you have such a connection and a love and a joy for everybody in the church. And that's what the early church was like, that you would give anything. If your friend had a need, you would want to give it. Somebody in the church had a need, you would want to meet it. And that's what the early church was like. And now a lot of us say, well, you know, that was different then, and we can't do those things anymore. And it is harder. It is harder because of the way that life is. But it is not impossible. In fact, it's easier for us to know when people have needs than it used to be. We are more connected, well, not face to face, but on media and everything. When somebody has a need, they could present it. And there are people in the church whose needs are being met. And there are people in the church who find out someone has a need and give to them. And a lot of these people you never even know about. And when, for instance, when somebody has surgery or an operation or something, and they're going to be off their feet for a while, we have people that arrange meals to be brought to them so they don't have to worry about cooking. I remember when I had surgery, it was wonderful. I was like, okay, what gourmet meal am I going to have next time? I mean, it was better than my cooking. And the thing is that we have to care. But there is a huge problem we have now that we didn't have then. And one of these things is time. I remember the Africans would come over to America and they say, oh, it is so hard to live here and be spiritual. When we were at home, we would fast one day a week. We had all this time for prayer and praise and Bible study every day. You come here to America and Dad can't work and Mom stay home. We both have to work if we want to have a house. And they have to work so many more hours. And their whole culture has changed. They had a village, you know, when you're in your community, everybody raised everybody's kids. And when you're in America, you're also isolated, so everything falls on you. And that lack of time was stressful for them to keep up the spiritual level they were used to having in Africa. Now, there are some things that really have effect that shock me. For instance, when we look at the divorce rate, if you just look at a generic divorce rate of people that claim to be evangelical Christians, and people that aren't, there's no difference. But when you break that down to couples who regularly practice any combination of serious religious behaviors and attitudes, attend church nearly every week, read their Bibles and spiritual materials regularly, pray privately and together, generally take their faith seriously, living not as perfect disciples but as serious disciples, they enjoy a significant lower divorce rate than mere church members. It's not enough to walk in the door to a church to really be an active church member. Otherwise, you've heard sayings like, just because I'm in the barn doesn't make me a cow. It's just because you're in church doesn't make you a good Christian. There is a seriousness to this. And when these things are done, then all of a sudden there is change. And saying you believe something or merely belonging to a church, unsurprisingly, does little for marriage. But actually believing and actively being a part of a church makes our marriages healthier. So what does that tell you? This real relationships in church, our relationship with God, it makes a difference. Okay, here's another problem: excessive personal liberty. So there's no reason, it's not unlawful, there's no reason I can't do it if I want to do it. If it makes me happy, I'm going to do it. And here we are committed to loving God with all our being. If we would just commit to Him with all our being and regard others as more important than ourselves, then we wouldn't even need to bring up this subject. But here's a quote from Galatians 5, chapter 5, verse 13. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Now, you've heard the example of it's not wrong to buy idol meat, and if you've got a brother that has a problem with that, just don't eat it when you're around them. But there are some things that we do because we can that damage people just from the mere fact that we do it, because it becomes an excuse for them. Well, if they can do it, we can do it. And why? Why is it so important that we have to do it for us, for our own personal pleasure, that we're going to open the door for somebody else to sin and stumble? And the example that comes to mind the most is alcohol. Not everybody has problems. I do not have problems with alcohol, but 3 out of the 5 people in my family do. And one of them's fine, one of them still struggles. And for me to drink is to say, oh, it's okay to drink. It's my sister, she's the pastor's wife. If she drinks, then why can't I drink? And it becomes an excuse. And churches where drinking is allowed, people that struggle with alcoholism have a much worse time and a higher incidence of falling down than churches that do not believe in drinking. The official Assembly of God's stance is against drinking. And no, you cannot make the case in the Bible that drinking is wrong. You can make the case very clearly that drunkenness is wrong. And at the time, there was a time when we did not realize there was such a thing as alcoholism. And when it became apparent, and when was right around the time of a revival that involved somebody named Finney, Charles Finney, and wonderful revival, but he said here we go. In his treaty that said, things which may stop a revival, Charles Finney said, resistance to the temperance reformation, temperance was not drinking, will put a stop to revivals in a church. The time has come that it can no longer be innocent in a church to stand aloof from this glorious reformation. The time was when this could be done ignorantly. The time has been when ministers and Christians could enjoy revivals, notwithstanding that ardent spirit was used among them. But since light has been thrown upon the subject and has been found that the use is injurious, no member or minister can be innocent and stand neutral in the cause. They may speak out and take sides, and if they do not take ground on one side, their influence is on the other. Show me a minister that has taken ground against the temperance reformation who has had a revival. Show me one who now stands aloof from it who has had a revival. Show me one who now temporizes upon this point who does not come out and take a stand in favor of temperance who has a revival. It used to not be so, but now the subject has come up and has been discussed and is understood. No man can shut his eyes upon the truth. The man's hands are red with blood who stands aloof from the temperance cause. And can he have a revival? And he was ardent on this, and it was shown that there were two big issues that the churches that wouldn't take a stand on it didn't have revivals, was drinking and, at the time, slavery. And the thing is that drinking does such horrible damage in families that have alcoholics, and just some people that, I have friends and relatives that you tell them what they did the next day and they're in shock and they had no idea. And it's a devastating thing. So what about alcohol is so important to me? And I have no problem with drinking. I could drink my date under the table. I have that hollow leg. But why is it so important that I have to drink if a brother or sister is going to look at me and go, well, Lynn's a Christian and she drinks, so it's okay for me to drink, when they do have a problem with it? So I say to myself, yes, we have freedoms, and there are things that we can say, oh, it's okay for us to do. But really, the blood is on our hands when our brother looks at us and goes, oh, well, if they drink, then I can drink. And we're causing that brother to stumble. It is not that important a thing that we need to do it. And then there's the consumer mentality. We want to acquire goods and services for our own personal needs. And we get to the point where if we don't make enough money, if we don't have a good enough job, if we don't have all the luxuries that we now consider necessities, we feel like we're failures. I mean, I've heard good men that put food on the table, had a home and all, feeling like a failure because they didn't have a good paying job. That has nothing to do with what being a success in God's eyes is. And no matter how poor a family is, everyone feels like if they don't have a TV, a computer, and a cell phone, they're lacking in the necessities. Now, Jesus didn't even have a rent-controlled apartment. It is just such a mentality of having to have things, and things being so important. When I'll tell you that Greg and I didn't have a television for our first few years of marriage, and we didn't miss it. And and now we've gotten used to it. We've got to have the Amazon Prime and the Netflix and the this and the that, so at least we can pick and choose documentaries. That's my husband, documentaries. But it's not necessary. Things are not necessary. And we want to be cool, we want to fit in. We don't want to offend anybody. So we try and never say anything that's going to be offensive. And I'll tell you, if you're dealing with ordinary people, even Christians, there are things in the Bible that are going to be offensive to them. What was Jesus thinking about when he drove people out of the temple for that were selling the money changers and cheating the people? And what was he thinking when he called the religious leaders whitewashed tombs? Was he trying to be politically correct? But we can go over the other edge too, that those of us that, oh, we're so pure, we're so holy, we are holier than you are, and we want to make sure that you know that. And they err on the side of putting people down and judging people, when the Bible comes right out and says, judge not, lest you be judged. Where Jesus, who never sinned, he didn't, when he ate with the taxpayers, the sinners, he had prostitutes washing his feet with their tears and wiping with their hair. And when the woman was brought out in adultery, did he sit there and condemn her? No. The only people that he came out and condemned were those self-righteous religious people that were leading people astray. So be very careful when you want to get on your high horse and go, oh, well, I'm such a better Christian. Look at those people that, they just don't know what they're doing, because that's offensive to God. And I'll tell you, one of the last things, and this dearly, dearly hurts the church, lack of human contact. We live in a world where we text, we email, we buy online. I don't even go to the bank anymore. I take, our bankers used to know us. I take a picture of my check with my phone and deposit it right on my phone. We have so little human contact that we live a very insular life. Do you remember block parties? When I was a kid, the neighbors all got together and they would have a block party, like on Labor Day, where there was 3 or 4 of us neighbors, and we'd play bocce ball and swim in the pool. And thank goodness I had a neighbor with a built-in pool. And we'd have a barbecue together, and we used to all know our neighbors. And now a lot of us don't even know who our neighbors are and don't want to know who our neighbors are. It used to be that you smiled at people when you passed them on the sidewalk, and now we avert our eyes, and we just live in a very withdrawn society. And it's one of the reasons that church is so important, because a text is not the same. Right now, a lot of my doctors' visits are phone calls. I don't actually go into the doctor. And the one that we agree doesn't work as well is my counselor, because it's just not the same on the phone as it is in person. We've got video chat there, we can talk to each other. It's not the same. It's not the same. We need that personal contact, and we need that with other Christians. So we live in a difficult time to really do the things that the early church did so well. But that doesn't mean we can't strive for them. That doesn't mean we cannot reach out to people. We need to reach out. We need to touch people. We need to talk to people. And I know right now it's very difficult, but we can reach out in what ways we can. Right now I'm up here to help take care of a neighbor that just had surgery. And if nothing else, I don't want to disturb her too much because she needs a lot of rest. She just had back surgery. But we send the funniest texts back to each other, and we cheer each other up. Okay, so it's not face to face, but aunts, and I go over and help her with her bandages and keeping things clean. But that human contact is so important. We need that as part of our lives. We need it as part of our spiritual life. And the human contact with other Christians is so important, and it's very difficult right now. So do what you can to keep as much of that up as you can. And when the church opens its doors fully again, make sure that you're back in those doors, because there is no substitute for the community, God's family, your brothers and sisters. Lord, I pray that we would learn how to be true church members, that we would learn how to lift each other up, learn how to bring each other spiritually closer to you, that we would uplift each other, that we would challenge each other to live more godly lives. And Lord, may we get outside of those doors, because that's part of being the church too, is that go and touch others, and daily more are being added to the number. And people aren't being added unless somebody's inviting, unless somebody's talking to them. So what contact we do have now, bring us the will, the opportunity to lift each other up and to bring you to those, because so many people right now are struggling, and may they get to know Jesus through seeing us. In your name I pray. Amen. Well, welcome to Wednesday night church, which I'm afraid is not in person, but I'm looking forward to the day when it is. And next week, we're starting a whole new series. So join us, because I'm sure it'll be exciting.